Hard money is God's money. This is Pastor Wagner, and it's my weekly video blog. Well, today I'd like to talk about hard money, meaning precious metals or gold and silver, and how that this is God's standard of money. This is what God set up many, many years ago, millennia ago, for how people ought to use money. Historically, money consisted of precious metals, such as gold and silver, and the value of the money was according to its weight. Okay, that's very important. I'm just going to give you one verse. There are plenty where you could use to show that money was according to its weight in the scripture, but this one will suffice. This was when Jeremiah was told to go and buy a piece of ground, a piece of land in Israel. This was prior to the Babylonian captivity, because God told him that this captivity would end, the people would come back to the land, and then he would have this piece of ground. And so he was told to buy this and go to a notary and get it sealed and everything. It says there in Jeremiah 32 and verses 9 through 10, "And I bought the field of Hanameel, my uncle's son, that was in Anathoth, and weighed him the money, even 17 shekels of silver. And I subscribed the evidence and sealed it, and took witnesses, and weighed him the money in the balances." See, it says twice there, two different times. Jeremiah weighed him the money. It's very important. 17 shekels of silver. Okay, so a shekel is an ancient unit of weight of the Babylonians, and hence of the Phoenicians, Hebrews, and others, equal to 1/60th of a mina. It's a coin of this weight, especially the chief silver coin of the Hebrews. So back then, money, whenever you went and paid for something, you would weigh the money out. You would give them a certain amount of weight of silver and gold. You wouldn't give them some piece of worthless paper money, which is some IOU that will never be paid. The dollar used to be one such financial instrument. The dollar used to be according to weight of gold and silver. I have here a quote. You can find this all anywhere. I mean, all over the internet. People generally don't know it anymore today, but it's out there for those who actually want to know. This quote is from Peter Schiff in his book Crash Proof 2.0. He says, "A dollar was first defined in the Mint Act of 1792 as 371.25 grains of fine silver, exactly the weight of the Spanish mill dollar, which was the common coin in colonial America, and which continued to circulate legally in the United States until 1857, 70 years after the signing of the Constitution." So back then, a dollar was defined not just as some nebulous thing where it's just a piece of paper with some writing on it. A dollar was actually a weight of silver, 371 grains, which turns out to be just a little over an ounce, as I remember it anyway, just slightly over an ounce. So a dollar was about an ounce of silver back then, and you can see how our currency has been debased now, because now an ounce of silver costs about $20, and a few years ago it was $50, and a few years from now it'll probably be a lot higher than that. But anyway, that was what a dollar was. Today, if you go to a bank and you ask them to define a dollar, they can't do it. Nobody can define. They don't know what a dollar is. A dollar back then, though, was a weight of silver. The Constitution, now this is some old antiquated document probably a lot of people aren't really familiar with anymore. This used to be the supreme law of the land of the United States. It's long since been dead, in case you were wondering about it. But the Constitution, that old antiquated piece of paper that nobody listens to anymore, it said, "No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payments of debts." That's from the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. See, our forefathers understood the evils of paper money. They went through it in the Revolutionary War with the Continental. That's where the old saying, "not worth a continental," comes up, because they inflated the currency at the time, the Continental, to the point where it became absolutely worthless. And they didn't want to go through that again, and they specifically put in the Constitution only gold and silver coin would be tender of debts. Nothing else was to be made. Legal tender by the states. Now, the U.S. at that time, in the 1800s up into the 1900s, was on what you call a bimetallic standard, which means both gold and silver. This was problematic, though, because the ratio of gold and silver was fixed. So they were fixed in accordance with each other. So it used to be 15 to 1, 15 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold. Then whenever the supply of gold and silver started to change relative to each other, it went to 16 to 1. And the problem is what happens when you're on a bimetallic standard, when the dollar had been defined in silver and then the ratio of gold to silver is pegged together, whenever the amount, the volume of gold or silver fluctuates relative to each other, a law in economics called Gresham's law comes into play. And basically, in layman's terms, what Gresham's law says is that bad money drives out good. Let me give you an example, and this will make it really easy to understand. So in 1964 and prior, dimes and quarters and 50-cent pieces were made of 90% silver. In 1965 and afterwards, all the silver was taken out of quarters and dimes. Most of it, I think half of it, was taken out of 50-cent pieces, and later on in the mid-70s, all of the silver was taken out of 50-cent pieces as well. But so in 1965, dimes and quarters had no silver in them anymore. Well, it didn't take long before the silver dimes and quarters, the 1964 and prior ones, eventually went out of circulation. Nobody would spend them anymore because the valueless ones, the ones with no silver in them, were being circulated at the same number value as the silver ones were, but the values of the two of them, the actual value was quite different. And so nowadays, you will not find, unless just by chance, you won't find a 1964 quarter floating around out there. The reason is because it's worth $3.47 in today's dollars in 2014. A dime is worth $1.39 in today's dollars. A few years ago, it was worth over twice that much because silver was worth over twice that much. But so today you'd be an absolute fool to take a 1964 quarter and go out and buy a pack of gum. I don't even know, can you buy a pack of gum for a quarter anymore? But whatever you would buy for a quarter, you'd be a fool to use a 1964 quarter because it's worth $3.50 right now. You'd use the other one and you'd hoard the 1964 quarter. That's Gresham's law. The bad money, the 1965 and beyond quarters that are worth nothing, basically, the bad money drives out the good out of circulation. That's what happened when the United States was on a bimetallic standard. For instance, in the gold rush in the 1800s, whenever the supply of gold increased, then that ratio of gold to silver was changed, and the bad money, the less valuable money, would drive out the good money. So at that point, then, it was either gold or silver would be taken out of circulation by the people because they would trade in the more valuable money to the bank for the less valuable money. Or they would trade in the less valuable for the more valuable, and the other one would go out of circulation, and they would have a problem with money shortages in those days because of that. So you don't want to have that ratio fixed. But anyway, I digress. So in 1934, the U.S. government made it illegal for citizens to own gold, except for numismatics and jewelry and that kind of thing. But yeah, there were hefty fines and imprisonment if you were caught holding on to your gold. Everybody had to turn it in, and the reason why they had to turn it in is because once they got it all turned in, then they devalued it from $20 and some odd cents an ounce of gold to $35 for an ounce of gold. So people overnight lost 70% of their purchasing power after they turned the gold in. In 1965, as I mentioned, the silver was taken out of quarters and dimes, and then later on completely out of 50-cent pieces. In 1971, Richard Nixon closed the gold window, as they call it. And what happened was, after 1934, U.S. citizens were not allowed to own gold. U.S. citizens could not redeem gold for dollars, but foreign countries could still redeem gold for dollars. So what was happening was, in the years coming up to 1971, the Federal Reserve was printing way more dollars out there than they had gold to back it up. And foreign countries began to realize that the value of the dollar is going down. See, after World War II, we were on what you call the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the dollar was made the reserve currency of the world. So all the world was using the dollar. Well, they began to realize the dollar is being devalued, and they started cashing in the dollar to the U.S. Treasury for gold. Well, they realized we're going to be all out of gold and we're going to be in big trouble. So at that point in August of 1971, Richard Nixon closed the gold window and no longer allowed foreign countries to be able to redeem their dollars for gold. And at that point, the United States went completely off of the gold standard to a complete fiat dollar. And anybody that was in the 70s remembers, or anybody that can look on the internet at charts, sees that inflation exploded at that point because there was nothing left to restrain the Federal Reserve from printing up as many dollars as they wanted. And the price of gold went from $35 an ounce to $800 and some dollars an ounce, and people remember that. If you weren't around in the 70s like me and you don't remember that, we'll just stick around. It's happening before our eyes again. The Federal Reserve has now quintupled its balance sheet in the last 5 or so years. After the crash of 2008, the Fed's balance sheet was at $800 billion. It's now at $4 trillion, 5 times as much. Now, inflation hasn't risen 5 times as much, has it? But just hold on. Just wait till the money starts circulating. It will happen. So with the gold backing gone, then there's nothing, like I said, there was nothing left to restrain the Federal Reserve from printing as much paper money as it wanted. Now this is a wicked policy of debasing the currency, but it's not new. This has been going on for a long time. The Romans did it. They started clipping the coins and substituting lead in for their silver coins so that they could debase their currency to maintain the empire. All empires end up crashing under their own weight. They always end up crashing because of economic reasons, the same reason why the United States empire will eventually crash, I would have no doubt. But this policy even goes beyond the Roman Empire. This goes way back thousands of years. The Jews were doing this same type of thing a long, long time ago. Listen to this quote from Amos 8:4-5. It says, "Hear this, O ye that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor of the land to fail, saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit." Well, the ephah was a Hebrew dry measure. Okay, so that's what you would measure the wheat in. The shekel was what you'd measure the money in, the silver in. And what they were doing is making the ephah small and the shekel great. So they would have somebody come and they'd say, okay, I'll sell you 10 ephahs of wheat or barley. So what they would do is they would actually make it small. They would give you, say, 8 ephahs of wheat when they were saying that they would give you 10 ephahs. And then they'd say, okay, I want 10 shekels for this 10 ephahs of wheat. And they'd lay out the silver, but they'd falsify the balances. And they'd put the silver on the balance, and they would end up charging, say, 12 shekels of silver for the 10 ephahs of wheat, actually for the 8 ephahs of wheat. So they were charging more money for less stuff. Okay? That's exactly what happens through inflation. When the Federal Reserve creates more money, there's more money in circulation. It devalues the money that is currently in circulation, and all that extra money bids up prices of the same amount of stuff, and you end up paying more money for less stuff. There's nothing new under the sun. But the thing is that God hates this kind of thing. He says in Proverbs 20 and verse 10, divers weights, that means many weights, divers weights and divers measures, both of them are alike abomination to the Lord. Abomination is a combined feeling of disgust and hatred. God hates that kind of thing when you have unjust weights and balances, when you have somebody inflating the money supply and driving down the value of the people's money in their pocket. And what inflation does is it robs savers of their money. It robs it a little bit at a time because your money becomes of less and less value and can buy less and less. So that money that you put in the savings account, when you take it out a few years later, it won't buy as much stuff, and you're being robbed of your money by the Federal Reserve. It says in Leviticus 19, verses 35 and 36, "Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, in weight, or in measure, just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin shall ye have. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt." God says just balances, just weights. That's God's form of money. And like I said, inflation ends up robbing people of their purchasing power. And what it does, just imagine this. Imagine if the Federal Reserve tomorrow printed up enough money so that every U.S. citizen was given a check for $1 million. Would we all be millionaires? Would we all be living high on the hog? No. There's no more stuff in the economy. There's the same amount of stuff. Production hasn't increased. Just the paper money's increased. So all this extra money chasing all the same amount of stuff will just drive the prices of the stuff up, and nobody will have any more stuff than they had before. It doesn't, inflation does not create prosperity. Now, what inflation does do, though, is creates prosperity for the first people that get it. The big banks that are the first ones that get it, yeah, it works well for them because they get the money whenever it's still at the same present value. But as it circulates through the economy and gets out there, and then all that money starts chasing all the same amount of goods and services, then the prices go up. But the people that get the money first, before the prices have risen, they make out like bandits. The rest of us slobs end up getting screwed, and we get the money when it's been devalued, and then we're no better off, we're worse off because our money is worth less. And what it ultimately ends up doing, inflation, it ends up creating what the Austrian School of Economics calls the business cycle. And what it does is it drives malinvestment because it drives down interest rates to artificially low levels. And then businesses out there see interest rates at lower levels than what the market would have driven them down to. And they take it from that there is a big pool of savings in the economy, because in an economy where people are saving a lot of money, interest rates go down. It's the law of supply and demand. If there's a high supply of money, the demand goes down, or if there's a high supply, the price goes down. The price of money is the interest rate. The price of money goes down. So when entrepreneurs and businessmen see the interest rate going down, they assume there's a lot of savings in the economy. People aren't spending money right now. They're saving it to spend later. And the businessmen decide to go out on longer term ventures, and they do longer term projects, assuming that there's a whole bunch of savings that are going to be able to capitalize them, that they will be able to use to pay for these investments. Well, the problem is that the interest rates are artificial, and they're not able. And what happens is there's a big boom, and then they are not able to complete these projects. And then the bust comes. And then when the bust comes, then the guy on the street loses his house. He loses his job. And that's what inflation ultimately causes. It causes the boom-bust cycle, and you end up losing what you've worked hard for. It's an ungodly and it's a wicked thing. So anyway, this is all I have to say this morning about hard money being God's money. Maybe, Lord willing, someday I'd like to cover this in more detail in a sermon. But anyway, thank you for listening. I hope this has been instructive to you, both from the Word of God and from an Austrian economics perspective. Thanks for listening.